Hi everybody. This video is about the early Cold War years, and we're going to discuss a lot. We're going to discuss containment policy, the spread of communism, the Marshall Plan, NATO, how the US military was involved in containment, as well as the Soviet Union and their atomic bomb. Lot to do this video. So the first thing that I want to talk about is containment policy. So this is established in 1946. And the whole goal behind containment policy is to stop the Soviet Union from expanding their power and communist influence throughout Europe. So if you see here, the United States thought that the Soviet Union was a threat to the world. So they implemented both the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Those are underlined and bolded because they're important. When you are discussing the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan in your notes, you should not be writing down these quotes. These quotes came directly from the men who came up with these policies. However, instead of writing down the quotes themselves, you should write down the idea behind the Truman Doctrine and the idea behind the Marshall Plan, which I'm about to tell you. So, the Truman Doctrine. Truman says, "I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures." Now, what do you think he means by outside pressures? He's talking about the Soviet Union. And he's saying that we want to support people who want to be free. So he says that it is the United States' goal to help countries fight back against communist influence. This is really the basic, Truman Doctrine is the basic policy of containment. Now the Marshall Plan takes that a little bit further. The Marshall Plan says that we need to make sure that people are not suffering. Western Europe was in a very bad place after World War II. The Nazis and the Soviet Union had really wrecked Eastern Europe during the war. So people are starving, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of political transition, and there's a lot of economic problems. So the Marshall Plan says, we're going to help the people in Europe. We're going to help them with food. We're going to help them with supplies, machinery, and the main goals here, this is important, the main goals of the Marshall Plan was to weaken the appeal of communism, open up the markets of these countries to trade with the United States, and raise the production in those countries. So let me say that again because it is important. The purpose here is to weaken the appeal of communism, open markets for trade with the US, and raise production in those countries. So, let's talk a little bit about why was the Truman Doctrine and the containment policy started. So the specific event or the specific, catalyst that started the Truman Doctrine was the Soviet Union, which you can see is right here. You can see Moscow, the capital of Russia, was spreading its communist influence to these Eastern European countries. Well, eventually they move all the way down to the Middle East and they start going through Turkey and into Greece. And the United States sees this as a big threat. And so that's when the Truman Doctrine comes out and he says, we have to help these people. So if you're ever asked what caused the Truman Doctrine, you can say the Soviet intervention in Greece and Turkey. So what the United States does is they give millions of dollars of aid to these two countries to help them resist communism. So this picture here, this map, shows you how much aid the United States gave to these countries through the Marshall Plan. So you can see Turkey and Greece received money, and a lot of these European countries did as well, because the Marshall Plan was supposed to promote democracy through stopping the spread of communism, right? So anyway, it is important to note that these Eastern European countries, you can see without the dollar signs on them, as well as the Soviet Union, were offered aid through the Marshall Plan, and they neglected to take that money. Why would a country neglect to take money that was free? What do you think? They neglected to take this money because they were asserting their communist influence and not allowing any democratic capitalist influence to come at all. And lastly, these two cartoons are very famous. You can see this is the United States perspective when they issue the Truman Doctrine. They're afraid that the USSR, the Soviet Union, is going to spread their influence throughout the whole entire world. You can see the map, all the arrows going down throughout the world, and you see little Uncle Sam here can't do anything about it. So the Truman Doctrine said, you know what, we're going to be the big Uncle Sam, and we're going to make sure that the USSR, the Soviet Union, cannot spread their communist influence, and we're going to contain it all in one place. So this is a good example of the Truman Doctrine. This is a good example of the Marshall Plan. So in reaction to the Marshall Plan, this is a direct reaction to the Marshall Plan, the Soviet Union, remember that Germany is split into 4 zones, right? One for each of the Allied powers, and so is Berlin. So you can see French, British, American, and East Berlin. So anyway, to get to Berlin, the Americans or French or British had to travel through the territory of Germany that the Soviet Union controlled. So Stalin decided, I know what I'm going to do in response to this Marshall Plan. I am going to completely block off the entire route to get to Berlin. So the Americans or the British or the French that are trying to send in their supplies, they're not going to be able to get them in. And so this is really one of the first conflicts of the Cold War in which the military becomes involved. So the Soviet Union is blocking all of the entrances to these sectors of Berlin with their military, with force. And so what the United States does is the United States Air Force begins airlifting supplies into these areas so that they can survive. So here you can see this is a Air Force plane filled full of milk. And you can see this ad right here. It says milk, now a weapon of democracy. And you can see the milk coming out of the plane. The United States literally dropped supplies from the air from U.S. Air Force planes. And this makes the Soviets super embarrassed because they had this grand plan to block off Berlin and really assert their power and dominance. And the U.S. kind of just laughs them off. They're like, we'll just use our Air Force to do it. No big deal. And the Soviets don't ever rebel against that Air Force because that would mean an all-out war. So I just really want to review what the cause was. Think in your head, can you think of the cause of the Berlin blockade? The cause is the Marshall Plan. Remember, the U.S. giving that economic aid to those countries. And the result of this airlift is that the United States looks impressive because they figured out how to make this situation workable. And it also makes the Soviets really embarrassed. Eventually, they just lift the blockade. They really were not able to assert any power or dominance, and they looked kind of stupid. So, in 1949, the United States understands that things are kind of heating up between them and the Soviet Union. And the United States starts NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And what this is, really the only thing that you need to know about this is that it is a mutual or collective defense alliance. So these are military alliances with other countries that say we will collectively help keep each other safe. And if you see here on this map that all of the NATO countries are in dark blue, so you can see most of Europe is in dark blue, and United States allies are in light blue. So you can see the US had allies all around the world. So anyway, the US creates NATO in 1949, and this really alarmed the Soviet Union. They were kind of shocked that the US was committing to this military alliance. So Stalin creates the Warsaw Pact. And this is the same exact type of military alliance. However, this is between Soviet countries, their allies, as well as those Eastern European countries that the Soviet Union had really taken advantage of. So again, the Soviet Union, Eastern European communist influenced countries, and their allies. So you can see here on the map kind of NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. And again, if we're talking cause and effect, NATO is the cause, Warsaw Pact is the effect. Here's another closer up example. You can see these Eastern European countries here a little bit closer, and these other European countries a little closer. And you can see here that Turkey and Greece actually end up being a part of NATO because of that Marshall Plan. They were influenced by the United States to become a part of their alliance, rather than the influence that the Soviet Union tried to use before the Marshall Plan. Okay, so in 1949, the country of China has a revolution as well, and they become communists. And this freaks out the United States. This really intensifies the U.S. fear that the Soviet Union is trying to spread communism. So this is an example of non-containment. The U.S. was not able to contain communism in the Soviet Union. It spread to China. The last thing that we're going to talk about in this video is that the Soviet Union actually is able to produce their first atomic weapon in 1949 as well. So this is a big deal. And people start asking the question, where did they get the technology for the bomb? And what is uncovered is that these people right here, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, they were accused of espionage or spying. Espionage means spying. And they were accused of giving away the science and the secrets behind the production of the U.S. atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. So in 1953, they were charged with that espionage, and they were found guilty and killed because of it. But once the Soviet Union has an atomic bomb, this really starts off that nuclear arms race that we've been talking about. The United States feels threatened, just like the Soviet Union felt threatened when the U.S. had their bomb. And this really changes the shift in power between the two again, and creates even more tension than there was before. Before we move forward, I do want to kind of point out the fact that when Ethel and Julius Rosenberg are accused of giving away those atomic bomb secrets, this is when the second Red Scare really begins, that seeking out of communist subversives and communist spies in the United States. So that's all that we have for this video. You should answer your understanding questions at the end and turn your card to green. Thanks.